In this episode, I want to show how I changed this image into this. Now, this is an add-on service that I provide for real estate agents who want to give different ideas to potential buyers on how they might be able to transform a space or an entirely empty lot and property. Now, I have an earlier video showing how I did that last transformation, but in this video, what I want to do is show how I transformed that empty commercial space into something better with this complete real estate editing makeover. So this entire edit was done in Photoshop, and the original picture was shot and captured similar to other photos for this shoot using the high-end HDR technique that I show in my expert editing course. And other shots on this commercial shoot were captured using Flambient as well, like I show in my Pro Interiors course. And I have links to those and my other courses and books in the description. This one though was done just using the high-end HDR technique, but obviously it needs a little love, and that's why I did all these edits for this particular client. Now, the first thing you want to do when you're doing something like this is you want to be able to resize this to about 2000 pixels wide if you want to use this technique. And that's because Firefly, the engine that's inside of Photoshop, is limited to 2000 pixels wide. Now, we could segment that out, and if we did, for instance on full size, that's what we would have to do here. Now, I have another video that shows if you want to do type of generative fill for any size image, how you would break this apart into different segments and do it. Basically, that is doing, like we can see on the floor here, adding the floor in different segments. So I have a different generative AI fill for each of these different segments. And there's a lot that goes into this, not just in each segment, but also because you'd have to delete things like the floor and the ceiling so that you don't confuse the AI engine. This gets very complicated. If you want to see a tutorial on this, just let me know in the comments. But let's move back over here. This is the reason why this was resized to 2000 pixels. Now, if you haven't done that yet, all that you would do is on your base layer at the very bottom that you're starting with, or your merged layers or stamp layers, or however you're going to edit this, what you would do is you would go up to Image, and then you'd go to Image Size. In there, then you would select 2000 pixels wide, and then it's best to use this Preserve Details 2.0 and reduce the noise. This just keeps it nice and sharp, but that's really a small preference. If you're upscaling an image, this is more important. When you're downscaling, it's not as much. Anyways, once you've done that and you've clicked OK, then you've got this image that's 2000 pixels wide, and you can do just about anything to it, and you're going to preserve then the high resolution no matter what the AI engines inside of Photoshop do, especially when it comes to the generative fill. So after it's resized, the biggest thing you want to do first is clean up everything. So what I did was I did some going from the bottom up here on these various layers. I first did some generative fill. Now, if you've never done generative fill before, it's very simple. We're going to do it a lot throughout this tutorial, but basically what it is going above the layer that you're working on. We'll start here at the very bottom. What I like to do is I like to use the polygon lasso tool, and that's over here where I've got the polygon lasso tool, just the polygon tool. And for instance, the first one that we were working on here, if I were to draw just a polygon around this area and then double click to close that, then if I go up to the edit menu and I go to generative fill, and in here I get a dialog box. If I don't want to change anything and say that I want something specific here, it's going to do basically a generative remove, and that's where I would then click just generate, and then it'll do its AI thing, and it'll give me then three choices like so. So I've got this, or I've got this, or I've got that. And all that is just a single layer then that was created, as we can see here. And working in these small segments with just taking a piece at a time, doing these generative fills or generative removes, that's where then we have a lot of control. Now, if we did specify something in here, which we will do throughout this tutorial, then something else will be put in there based on what we specify. Now, I did something similar also then for here, where I got rid of this other ductwork. And once again, that's another generative fill layer with nothing as a prompt. That way it can fill in using the surrounding area. And once again, that also was just drawn here with a polygon. So now that I've got these in there, I decided to start doing some cleanup. Now what I like to do is, that's why there's so many layers here. I like to take my cleanup in small little steps. So here, this particular layer, when I turn it on, you'll see just a couple things went away over here, the extension cord and this trash can over here. So what I would do normally is, above the layers that I'm working on, I'll just turn this one off, I would go up to Layer, and I would go to New Layer, and name it whatever you'd like, and you'd say OK. Then on that layer, that's when you can use things like the Remove tool. Like if I use the Remove tool, and I have the Remove tool as Sample All Layers, if that's checked up here, then it will look at everything on all these layers as I'm doing the remove, like on these items down here. And then when I click the checkbox or I press enter and it does its fill, it does it just on that layer. And you can see if I turn that layer, that's the only one on, you can see that's the change it did. So that's why I like to do these things in steps. Now we'll just, for right now, just get rid of that layer. I'll just delete that. Now you'll see a lot of these layers as I start moving through, and you can do these as you see fit, as what you feel would be best. Hey, I want to segment this out. I just want to save these edits that I'm doing for this remove instead of trying to boil the ocean and take it on all at once in case something goes wrong. So let's take a look at some more remove, and that's where I started adding in these other layers over here. You can see where if I turn one of these on, you can see I got rid of this stuff here. And once again, that's also just another generative remove that I had here. So generative fill, basically without a prompt, does a generative remove. Had a few different options and I liked this one the best, and that's what I went with. Same thing then for these other layers to get rid of all that stuff there, and then this other stuff over here. So now things are looking pretty good. Now I've got something as kind of a blank slate besides some other remove that I want to do inside of here. We'll do in a little bit. But having this already, I can start adding a lot of things in. And the first thing I wanted to do was try the flooring. So I did another generative fill here. This, if we take a look at the prompt for this, now this isn't where I'm doing just a generative remove. I'm doing a real generative fill where I'm typing in light colored hardwood floor over the selection that I made. And then it gave me a few choices, and I liked this one here. Now, once again, that was, if I take a look at just this layer, you can see that's all that it produced, because the selection I made, if we take a look at that here, that's the selection. By the way, I did Alt click on there so I can see the mask bigger. If I do Control click on that mask, then you can see the marching ants. Notice also here that I went a little bit higher than the flooring. That's very typical to do a good generative fill, but a lot of times you can keep it right down to the floor. You don't want to go into the floor. You want to make sure that you're at least outside of it so it has something to work with, knowing how to overlap. So the next thing is we keep moving along, doing more of this stuff. Now what I did here on this layer, you can see I did a bunch of remove. This layer here was not a generative fill. This was just another blank layer that I used the remove tool and the cloning tool on, just so that I could get rid of this stuff in the office over here. So starting out with a blank slate. Now I did put in white walls, and that's coming up here shortly. But the reason I like to do this first is you'd like to have a clean slate, do it in pieces, and it makes AI's job a lot easier to try to figure out what to do. So it doesn't have to boil the ocean and try to figure out all the things it needs to remove before putting something in. Now, there were some things that annoyed me with the hardwood floor, so I added like a layer here to add it in over here. Not the best of job, but it's going to be in the distance, that's fine. And then I decided in that office to add in some white walls. And it really struggled here. So if we take a look at the properties here, I said white walls, and it did a bunch of weird, funky stuff. Now, I could take a lot of these and then edit them in so I could have something a little bit better. But I thought that if I started with this would probably be the best. And I could keep clicking generate as many times as I want and get something worthwhile. Anyways, that was for the white walls. And then I wanted to put stuff on the walls to see if, am I gonna keep this or not? So I said, let's put some modern art here on the walls. And that was nothing more than another generative fill layer, said modern art. And all that was selected was just that little area. That's all I needed. And then I decided to put in a desk. Now this is what I thought was really impressive using Firefly's generative fill. So what I did here, you can see it's just that little area that was selected, just that small area selected, but it knew to put the desk behind this black beam that's in the window. If I tried doing this, for instance, with Apply Design, this is where we get other problems. So for instance, if I did this with Apply Design, and I added in my own stuff, I'll get rid of this floor thing here, and I'll do Apply Design. This is what they would do with a full-size image, and it is good quality, but we can see when we zoom in over here that that desk is not behind that beam. So that's a real tough order for some of these virtual staging software packages to really handle. And you could do some more editing to that, but I just didn't like the way it looked. And this, by the way, was something though that really worked well with this image. This is a blank space, a commercial space that I did a long time ago that they wanted to transform. Now, I didn't have to worry about the ceiling, and there's no obstacles for the hardwood floor. So when I did the virtual staging for it, this is what happened. This is using Apply Design, and it did a fantastic job. Only cost $7 for the 1 credit to do this. You can see I added a whole bunch of stuff in here. Now, if you would like to see a tutorial on this as well, let me know, but I have other tutorials here on just doing Apply Design virtual staging for a variety of different real estate stuff, and I'll have links to all that down in the description of the video. But anything that I'm missing here you want to see, just let me know. So anyways, the hardwood floor here, for when we take a look at our current commercial space, just wasn't working out very well. So that's why I did this in just entirely Photoshop. And once again, I really loved how that desk appeared there. Now let's get into some of the harder stuff. I knew I needed to do something with the ceiling, not just because I didn't like the architectural look of the wood beams, but because you have all these struts that are here, all this stuff that's holding up the walls, making it earthquake proof and whatnot for California. But anyways, so what I did was I changed out the ceiling. Now this is messy, but it's going to get cleaned up. The thing is, don't try to get one finished result in one fell swoop. If you can do this in pieces and you see this ahead of time, it'll help. So this particular layer was just this. I drew a polygon around where the ceiling should be, and then here, when I did a generative fill, I set a ceiling with lights. Now, it did a bunch of weird stuff here, and none of them I really cared for, but I thought, well, with this one, I can edit this one. So what I did was I did another generative fill just to remove that chandelier. Now, I knew I'd be cleaning up all this other junk here, and we'll get to that in a second, but I wanted to do some of the big stuff, the harder stuff, and one was adding a bookcase over on this wall. And once again, that is another generative fill layer where I just said a modern wooden bookcase. Gave me quite a few options. I like this one the best. So I did some stuff in here first. I was like, well, let me get some of the stuff in here. It couldn't do hardwood floor. It did just carpet. And then I decided to add some white walls inside of here. That's what this is. Once again, another generative fill. But as I was in here and working in this particular area, I wanted to get views to the outside. So I said, let's get some views to the distance. And that's all this was. This particular layer was once again another generative fill layer with those 3 areas selected. And then I just said, give me a view to the outside. Gave me a few different options. This is the one then that I liked the most. So I said, let's just keep that. Moving on then, I added then a desk in this office, doing the exact same way that I added the desk over here. And then I decided to add some hardwood floor into here to try to tackle this office. And then I did a view to the outside here, and so far it's okay. We're going to clean that up a little bit more. But then I thought, well, now's a good time to clean up this ceiling. So I made another blank layer here, and I just used the remove tool. And that cleaned up all that stuff. I got rid of all that garbage up there. Now, is this perfect? No. This little corner should go all the way to the ceiling, but it doesn't. But it's okay for what we're doing. The next thing is adding some other furniture. I added a desk inside of here, and then I decided to add this little beam here, which was nothing more than really just cloning something else. But once again, that was on a separate layer. It wasn't a generative fill, it was just a blank layer. Now this is why, once again, there's so many layers here, because I like to do these in pieces. It's like, this not go very well? I don't have to change everything. I just have to go back and edit that layer. Now we get into something more complicated. And that's putting this conference room table here, and that's what this is. So what I originally did, I put this in a group and I'll show you why. Because without the group, you can see that the desk here went away. But this was a generative fill layer where I said a conference room table. And once again, it gave me a few different options. I really liked this one. I decided just to go with this one. But the problem is, once again, is it's starting to cover up then the work that I had in here. And that's because if we take a look at this mask, we can see it has to go into that office. You see it overlaps in here. So since it was overlapping into there, what I did was I made a group. I just took this one single layer, and you can right click and just say new group from layers. And then you can name it whatever you like, and then you've got a group and you can add a layer mask. So I added a layer mask, and then I just used the object selection tool to select the table here, the conference room table. Then I used an eraser and just erased around that. So that's why you can see there's like this little area that's been erased. So moving along here then, I wanted to really clean up this view to the outside, so I did a little bit more cloning and whatnot to get a better ceiling here. That's an overhang from the outside of the building. And then I decided to add some more artwork. So I added some artwork over here, which turned out to then just be a clock that I selected. I've tried a few different things. And then I also added another piece of art over here, not the greatest thing. But to finish off this office, I wanted something else there, so I said, let's add a couch. And once again, it knew to put it behind the walls and this beam. So once again, we got better results using Photoshop's generative fill than I would have got using Apply Design. And once again, this was just this little layer here. That's all it was, just adding that in there. Then I did some more floor repair. So if you look over here by the bookcase, that's where this particular layer was. It was just another generative fill that I added. Added another one here to add even more floor repair. And those are real simple. Those are just selecting an area of the floor and just doing a generative fill with nothing in there. If we take a look at the properties for this, we can see that it was just a generative fill, but there was no prompt. So that helped me repair that. Then I decided to just keep going. I was having fun, so I said, well, let's put a TV on the wall. Generative fill layer. Let's add some modern art over here. Generative fill layer, and then some other minor cleanups. That's all this was, just seeing I needed to do some minor cleanups. I also thought that the ceiling could use something else, so I said, let's keep going. Let's add this in. It's like, hey, that's kind of cool. What I did here was I said recessed lighting, and it gave me all kinds of weird stuff. And I thought, you know what? That's really bizarre. This was close enough to where if I wanted to, I could make a blank layer, use the remove tool, and just get rid of that stupid thing that was in the center. Then I did more cleanups, and this was just getting rid of some of this, just using some simple cloning in here as a remove tool. You can see a variety of stuff. And then once again, I wanted to clean up some stuff over here, and that was just using these layers as generative fill. But this one I liked because this one was another bookcase that I decided to add in there. So without it, and then with it. And once again, it was just another generative fill layer, but in this case saying I want a modern wooden bookcase, which was the same prompt I used when I did this one over here, but I kept them as separate layers. Then I decided to do a little more cleanup, and that's where these other two layers come in, where I forgot to get rid of this thing here, so let's clean up that. And then I did another one here where I just filled up a little bit better some of these beams over here. So this then was the final product. And how long did this all take? This took, after I'd done the HDR blending, the high-end HDR blending, which only took about a minute, maybe two, then this finished image here took a little over an hour. It was about an hour. Now, if you wanted to try to use Apply Design, you might have a longer lead time with that because of the back and forth of the rendering. That's why also this goes really quick. If you first resize this to 2000 pixels, then anything goes when you're doing the generative fill. And as long as you have a good machine with fast CPU power, the generative AI is going to go really quick. Now, just one thing to bear in mind is that this is for the marketing phase of the property. This isn't for the finished design phase. So during the marketing phase, when you're taking photos and your clients are then advertising a property, they like to be able to show potential that a property has. But once somebody has their mindset on how they want to transform a space, that's the design phase that's after they've already bought the property. That's when they'll bring in somebody that then, like a designer or architect, will take some LiDAR measurements to get a good 3D sketch scan that they can put into their CAD software and other internal type of rendering software. That's a completely different phase, and it costs a lot of money to have that done. That's why this is a less expensive alternative that you can offer your clients so that they can show potential without having to break the bank on having renders done.